Hello and welcome to AXSchat. We're delighted to have a returning guest today, Thomas Logan from Equal Access. Thomas, last time you talked to us about some of the training work you've been doing. I'm very interested to hear what you're doing now. I know that things have moved on somewhat, and you're using technology in interesting ways to help people understand about accessibility. So tell us what you're up to.
Sure. Well, I have worked in accessibility for 15 years, so it's kind of always a natural thing for me to want to look at what's new with technology or look at new kind of challenges and think about accessibility solutions. So recently, been doing a focus on virtual reality, thinking about augmented reality, some of the technologies, that are kind of on the next level of, really innovations that you're seeing and how people are building new software interfaces in these experiences. And, I feel like my angle to bring to that is to basically take the accessibility point of view, thinking about what we've learned from desktop software, web software, mobile applications. I think a big point for me going into the virtual reality discussion points was a lot of the same principles still apply, but we don't actually have the ways to implement those easily in these new technologies that are coming out. Yeah, and I've been doing, one thing that's been interesting for me that I think connects back into training and learning is I've been doing, I like this branding, a nano degree. I'm working on a nano degree from Udacity, but that's kind of interesting in this online learning environment. They actually have a degree program for virtual reality development. And so my focus in working on that nano degree is to look at the accessibility implementation. And so just to talk a little bit about my company, Equal Entry. So I started my company about 4 years ago in New York City, and based in New York City, we've got a team kind of all around the United States, and even a few people in Europe. We work very much on helping people assess technology for is it accessible or not. So we look at mostly web content accessibility guidelines 2.0, thinking about that, helping people comply with that. And then we do a lot of training and education based off of, hey, you made this inaccessible software, or you have issues in your software, here's ways that you can fix it and address it. And then the last part, which was really something more from last year and not as much when we talked before, but we have done expert witness work. There's been, a change, especially in the United States, with lots of litigation going on in the accessibility space. So that's another side of our business is helping people evaluate their accessibility and demonstrate that they're doing the right things for accessibility.
Okay, and accept my apologies for muddling up your company name.
It's Equal Entry.
No, I mean, everybody should have equal access, but yes, your name is Entry. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I know Antonio's got a question, Deborah probably has too, but we'll go with Antonio first.
So Thomas, you mentioned about virtual reality. Mm-hmm. And you see that if I just do a quick search, it does massive number of blog posts, information all over the place. I don't even know where to start if mm-hmm. I'm reading something. And there's also a good number of vendors trying to be on this space, from HTC to Samsung, and then we have Google, Facebook, and others. And you are working on accessibility. What you see, and all these organizations are putting together APIs, toolkits to support whatever they are developing. Where do you see that accessibility needs to be in order to make sure that all those resources that they are putting outside in the market can be used by people like you and other experts on accessibility?
Right. Well, so I think what's interesting is, there are lots of different articles and experiences. And one of the talks that I did last year on virtual reality, I really tried to, demonstrate, hey, I'm coming brand new to this. I sort of scoured the web, tried to learn as much as I could, and basically presented just a series of different cool ideas around how virtual reality experiences have been made accessible. And so one of the points from that, just to tie to your question, is there are great reference cases of someone going above and beyond to make a accessible experience in virtual reality, but the platforms themselves from Samsung, it's really thinking about the developer tools. That was really one of the thrusts of my presentation last year, and I feel like it still holds true today, unfortunately, is that there's not, documentation for developers of just like, hey, you're building any experience on this platform, it should be accessible. Here's how you do it. It's much more of a, you need to kind of go above and beyond and implement something much, it's unrealistic to expect that of developers. And so that's a big part of what I'm hoping to do in the work too on my nano degree, is to help point out some of the techniques that I implement, but have conversations. I would say that the makers of the Unity engine and the Unreal engine are two of the biggest developer platforms right now for building those experiences. And both of those I would like to see more of an API. I was encouraged recently with Unity. They do actually have a namespace. I think it's unityengine.accessibility. I'll check that, maybe tweet that out once we get the exact namespace. But they have the beginning of, there's only one thing in the namespace right now. It's a color palette chooser to help designers or game designers or experienced designers choose color palettes that work for the different types of color blindness. So I thought that was encouraging. It's like, okay, well, they have the namespace, they have the place to begin there. And so ideally that gets expanded out to think about all the things that we have in accessible APIs for like mobile phones or the web. And that was another point. I'm like, I don't think it needs to be that much different than what already exists. It's like we should start with the basics of what work on every other platform and have those available, start having people use them as they build experiences.
Just following that, from your experiences working on this, do you think that those developing in VR are having short development cycles? Or if they are short developing cycles, do you think that sometimes this way of dealing with low code and short development cycles can somehow put accessibility as the last thing that people want to think about it?
Yeah, and I would say it's not even as much short development cycles as it is that the market is still pretty small. So like the people that can afford to even invest in building what we would call like a rich experience, or probably even something that's consumer ready. You see a lot of demos and a lot of, examples, but because it is not a huge market right now, it's not that affordable to have these controllers really widely in people's homes. I think that's part of the thing where, like just like everything, every requirement, accessibility would become like, well, hey, we're just trying to get, something out, for the, small market that exists right now. And that's just for me, like I always want to challenge that, fight against that, because I feel like that's been my whole career working in technology. Is that's always the point. And at some point, these things become mainstream, and we don't want at that point to be, oh, let's make it accessible. Now that it's reached that, a lot of these things could be built in. But yeah, I think I think you hit on it. It's like short dev cycle or like, not enough commitment really to build up a team to work on these experiences at the level they need to be worked on to get them professional.
And Thomas, I think that's such a good point too that you and Antonio brought up, because the reality is often with newer technologies, accessibility is absolutely an afterthought if it's considered at all. And we have all this really cool new technologies, the AI, part of the machine learning, everything that's happening. And I'm looking forward to a day, and I know that you're leading the charge on this, when we're not always an afterthought. We're thinking, well, what would be really cool? We're creating this virtual reality experience, and what can we do to be really smart, creative developers and designers to make sure this works for everybody? So, wow, how would a person that was blind use this? How would a person, that can't use their hands use this? I mean, and so it become a real interesting design challenge and experience. And I don't think we're there yet. I think it's always like, I still hear, oh, blind people can use the computer?
Right.
It's like, what is wrong with you? They're some of the most proficient users of computers. I mean, so I sometimes wonder, why do we always have to keep starting the conversations from ground zero. And, you know, and I know also some people think, oh, well, you always want to start it by litigation, legislation, standards. Well, let's not do anything with virtual reality or AI or anything until we've addressed it with the W3C standards, you know, for example. And I just think that there is a more innovative way that we can be addressing this. I know you agree with that, and you're one of the innovators that are doing that. But I think it does tie into like Ian Hamilton's work with gaming and a lot of this really creative stuff that's happening. Vince Cerf's, you know, work that they're doing over there at Google. I mean, but how do we change the conversation so we're not always the afterthought?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is back to the developer tools. Like, I do think, you know, if I can, you know, have my one main point, it is like, if these things are built in a way where, like, when you build your sample first time experiences for someone just learning how to code on your platform, like, if that had the accessibility into it, it wouldn't, you know, it would be built into just, you know, I always say a lot of people start from the sample projects they get from these platforms. They start from that, and then they build something on top of it. So if the accessibility sort of work or consideration is built into something that's the default way people are learning these experiences, you know, then it is, I feel like, a more natural, you know, flow to getting someone to think about that. And that was Ian Hamilton that you mentioned was definitely someone that I learned a lot from in this space, and actually in the presentations that I gave. And also I learned a lot from Second Life. Like, one of my whole points was to say, like, look, even though we like to act like technology is always very new, it's like we do always have to look back, and we can look at a history of Second Life being a pretty, you know, probably the largest sort of ecosystem existing in that space. And there was very interesting things that are done for people who are blind. One of the things too, for people who had different mobility impairments and were, you know, staying in the home, something like Second Life, they were actually more likely to be the users of this platform. So it kind of goes to maybe developers working on these experiences. Hey, like, it actually might be more likely that you're going to have, you know, even a larger percentage of people that want to use your experiences. So again, it's like that thought process, getting people just to even look at what was done before and who were using these systems. And
yeah, Second Life was so interesting what they were doing. I was involved teeny little bit in some of the earlier conversations where we were going to really, you know, really bring the community together by getting on Second Life. And and the only problem that I had with it at the time, I thought it was great. Let's get on virtual reality. Let's get on Second Life. But let's also get out in the, you know, in the real world too. And let's get to know who we are. Is it, you know, so I was, there was a balance, always a balance that was happening. But Neil, I don't know if you want to comment on this. I said I was done, and then I started talking.
That's okay. I forgive you. So I mean, I'm very interested in how we define accessibility, because I think that these communities, and you mentioned Second Life, and that was a huge community, and there were lots of people with disabilities on there. There was lots of stuff around disability community building, which is not the same as accessibility, but it's still a really important thing. And I think that also don't necessarily want to follow, whilst I totally agree with you about the whole idea of baking it in from the beginning, we don't necessarily want to follow the example of the web, which took a focus on only a couple of particular areas of disability.
Good point.
And so if we're looking at new technology sets, should we not also take a new, fresh look at how we're delivering access and who we're delivering it for? So I think that there's a lot of potential. I think that yes, absolutely cheering on what Ian's doing and others are doing in the space, because they're innovating. They're not fixating on checkpoints. They're applauding people for making efforts and increasing the audience, and they're also making a clear business case and showing how this is bringing consumers into the fold and bringing revenue to the organizations that are doing this. I think we can do the same with the immersive, some of the immersive entertainment stuff that's out there. I think that also when you go back to looking at training, and we're talking about not reinventing the wheel, virtual reality and immersive experiences are some of the most powerful tools that we have right now for changing mindsets.
Yeah,
So,
like I mean, I think just like for whatever reason popped in my head thinking this example, but in the training space in virtual reality, you know, you can load a video, right? You can display a video. You might have an educational experience that you chose to put into this VR world, and I think education is always like one of the like education, training, simulations related to like, you know, job creation. Those are all areas that I'm passionate on, of like making sure that those are some of the first things that are available, you know, and are accessible. And I agree with the broad term of accessible doesn't mean the checkpoints. But so taking a video example, they're like loading a video into the Unity engine, displaying a video. They don't have like a built-in thing to display the closed captions that get put in there. There's really no reason to need to reinvent that piece. It's like right now I had to burn the captions, you know, into the video, which was fine. Like I'm able to do that, but sort of that design choice of not just already supporting, hey, every web video player now already has this, you know, toggleable way to support turning on captions if someone needs them. I think of that as just like a huge thing where it's like there isn't anything novel about playing the video head screen or on the web. It's like just do the same thing that you know, and keep making it better, but at least start from what we already have again.
Yeah, take the good bits.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then expand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I'm just saying, you know, let's use the opportunity of a new space to also open that up to slightly new ways of thinking. But yeah, build upon what's already been done. Absolutely. If there's a reusable components, then we should be making that easy. And the stuff that Antonio mentioned about low code, no code, and all of this, and it's and you rightly mentioned, if it's inside the platform that people are using to create content and it's part of the workflow, then the outcome will be that you'll have much more accessible content out there. If it's not part of the workflow and you're having to go to the effort of burning in captions and everything, it's not going to happen.
Right.
For the most part, not everyone's going to be dedicated to doing it. You know, there's I'm going to hold my hand up and say that sometimes when I'm tweeting out images, I'm on the wrong platform.
Yeah.
And that means that there's not the image description that it would be if I'd used the native Twitter platform.
Yes.
And there's that whole sort of, well, which audience are you trying to reach piece, because lots of people engage with visual content, and actually, but they also don't want to read all of the image description. If you put it in the tweet, it's a real difficult balance. Now, I just wish that Twitter would make tweet that do it, but it's because it's not in the authoring tool.
Yes.
You then have to make these kind of tricky and always going to upset someone decisions about how you deliver that content. And yeah, so that's right. It's incumbent on these people that are making the platforms to really help us make the world more inclusive.
I'm very passionate on that social media one, 'cause I know you guys do tons of social media, but yeah, that's a great example where I'm like, I hate that I don't have the same way to make something accessible on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. It's like, it's literally the same technique I need to apply, but I can't. Yeah, we have to come up with different, you know, thoughtful ways to consider it. And it's, yeah, I think that's a huge point of like, it should be in the authoring tools. And that's another thing for my company, Equal Entry. Like I'm seeking that kind of client, you know, working with like authoring tools, or like I'm big on having worked in this for so long. It's like having these expectations of people to go the extra mile to make something accessible, it's not realistic. And if you can make it really easy in the tool, people will do it. It's like just part of the natural work of making content, or like, you know, creating on whatever that platform is. So yeah, very, very much echoing the social media one there, that I would love for that to be easier than it is today.
Neil, to your point, I think you were also referring to training people and put them into situations where they really need to put themselves in the situation of someone with a disability, you know, let's say moving in a city environment, you know, in a wheelchair and facing the challenges that those people who are in that situation have. So I think there's also a role of creating experiences where you are able to create environments where you are able to educate people to understand better how it is to struggle in a certain environment, and through that find ways to change their mindsets in the way how they look and consider accessibility. You know, let's say could be in a city environment, could be in a work environment, could be in any environment.
Yeah, I love in virtual reality the experience of setting the height of the camera. It's one of those like sort of mind-changing things where you start realizing even not the distance even between being in a wheelchair to being like standing, but the difference of 6 feet tall, 5 feet tall, 4 feet tall. Like the world looks different from each of these vantage points, and I think that's really exciting in virtual reality to be able to actually, especially for the wheelchair scenario, the mobility scenario, planning real environments, but being able to, before they get built, you know, simulate them, you know, and go through from that, you know, that height perspective, that reach perspective. Those are things that I think great uses of virtual reality, and great way to get people to, like, you know, immediately get the experience, because you can have that experience sort of simulated in there and test that environment before it gets built. And I guess I rarely work in the built environment, but, you know, I think that's happening more and more as technology just gets put everywhere in the world. It's neat to work on the built world too. I think for a lot of years I was always in my computer screen, but I think that's a cool connection of virtual reality to the real world, and to the point too that I don't want virtual reality to be all of us sitting in our apartment and never going out, or like not interacting in the real world. I mean, that's a dark view of technology.
Thomas,
Yeah.
I always love your enthusiasm, and I want to go back to something you said earlier. So if I was one of these big companies that you mentioned with the developer tools, and I brought in equal entry and said, okay, fine, do it. Mm-hmm. How would you even begin?
I mean, one of the first examples that I've worked a lot for, you know, people who are blind and working with screen readers. So that's kind of like, I think also to the point of like a lot of the stuff that came from WCAG, thinking from that perspective. So one of the first ones that I'm very much on is like for objects that get taken either in augmented reality or into virtual reality. There's all these object creation tools. Like I'm going to make a chair. I'm going to make anything. That should have a accessible label. Like I feel like that property, the name or the label of something, it's on every platform. So just have that built in as a construct. Like every object that you drag in can receive that label, and you have a way to assign that and set that. And you also receive by default, whoever designed this object, they should be setting that because you were searching some marketplace to find that object, to put it into your experience. All that information should stay together. And I would definitely start there, just from solving the first thing of like, for people that can't see what you're displaying, what you're rendering, give it labels, right? And have that information discoverable. I mean, I think there's a lot of other tech to be built on of like, what if there's 50 objects in a room? What if there's 100 objects? But I think a starting point is have the label. So that would be definitely like one. The video one I mentioned too would be another easy one, where it's like, if you support rendering video in your experience, have the way to display the synced, you know, text translations. And probably the last one that I think, I mean, I think it's getting close there. I found a great, I will also get this available to tweet out, but a nice add-on for Unity that does text-to-speech across iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows. It works really cross-platform, but that's really nice for people that can't read or might have trouble reading text or any textual stuff that's being displayed. Have a way to voice it, you know, that's just built in by default. I would say that that would be nice if that wasn't something you needed to go download and pay for and add on. It's just built into the environment. Like I'm displaying text, so I want it to have the option to be read. Those would be like 3 places I'd start.
And I would think on the last example, that would really help people that aren't native speakers to the language being displayed. And I think that Neil wants to comment. So let me turn the mic over to him. Maybe I'm wrong, Neil. He was like, nope.
No, it's fine. But absolutely, we need to be bringing everyone along here. So.
Yeah, and I like the idea of building it right into the objects. And I know that I worked on a project so long ago. It was in 2002. I went to Ireland and I was working in Limerick with a company that doesn't exist anymore. It was called NetG, and Skillsoft wound up buying them. But they had thousands and thousands of training courses. And that is actually something they did. They had all these objects that they used. They consistently used them in all the different courses. And they actually went to the object level and they put the tags in there. And I thought at the time, oh, that is so smart. But because do it there so that every time the developer and designer are grabbing it, it's just part of it. And it's so reminding you. Yeah,
and a lot of it does already work that way. It's just a strange part of like the metadata is not getting connected to like an accessibility API. It's like doesn't feel like it's too much of a leap to get it there. It just needs to get there.
Yeah. We just need to do it. So yeah, that's why it would be exciting to see some of these companies are making the development tools, working with people like you to make sure that because you're taking the time to do that with privacy and security and other things. So we know that it can be blended in. We know it can. And this is about tech for all. This is about, you know, equal access. This is about making sure everybody can contribute. It's why do you want to leave anybody out? I know as a former programmer, I could never do it now. But if, you know, when I was building code, I didn't want anybody left out of the code. It never really even occurred to me that I could be leaving people out by my coding. I mean, it was a billion years ago, but I'm hoping more developers and designers know about accessibility. It does seem like, that is true, but caring about your audience and understanding your audience absolutely includes people with disabilities and situational disabilities and things like that. That to me is, where we're going as society.
Yes. Yeah, and I think, I mean, I definitely am. Almost every new developer or designer I meet that's either new to accessibility or learning accessibility. I mean, I do think people always want to do the right thing, but I think going back to the point of Neil talking about social media and adding like text alternatives, like that is much harder, especially if you don't like work in this field. If there's not any like prompting or like thinking on that, it's just, a lot of people would naturally want to do it, but they don't have the like, it's not in the workflow, right? Or it's just not present enough to have that consideration.
Absolutely. Another example is WordPress, which actually does some of this quite well in that as a CMS, when you're uploading stuff, as part of the upload process, you've got before the picture goes live into your page, you've got all of the boxes there to put in the image descriptions and the captions and all of this kind of stuff as part of the workflow. So it's immediately obvious for someone, oh, there's a box there. I could fill that in. If only they kind of did the similar workflow for things like link descriptions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of those ones where you know, a bit like explaining why you need to do image descriptions. It's like, please don't do click here links. And what happens is, I mean, I've done this again today, and Sophie Barker, if you ever listen to this, I apologize. She's our internal comms lady. She's new, and she'd done a piece, about AXSchat winning the Digital Mindset Award for our internal, for our staff bulletin.
Yeah.
And she said, "Yay, woo, woo!" But yeah, show the prize, Antonio. But essentially, she'd done all of this. She went, to read more, click here, and I went, let me show you. And the thing is, we give these jobs to junior people. We can't necessarily expect them, to know why. You know, we can't expect everyone to understand how screen readers work and everything else like that. But I mean, I took the time. But we need to find. But that's labor intensive. We need to find ways of spreading that knowledge and that empathy. And because as soon as she understood why she needed to do it, she's like, right, I'm going back and I'm changing all of the ones in the rest of the bulletin. So it's not because people don't want to do it, it's because they don't know about it.
Right.
Yeah, I actually use a service on Twitter, like I follow Please Caption, and like if I forget to like put it on, it tweets right at me like, hey, you didn't caption this. Yeah, and it's like sometimes it's just in a workflow, hey, it like got stuck somewhere and it can't do it. So I love having that kind of, I think that's another, it's nice when there are other checks on top of like a workflow to say, hey, you forgot to do this.
Yeah.
That's a good tip to put on one of the tweets during the chat too, because I didn't know about that. So I'd like to know about that. That would be very helpful to have.
Yeah, and I keep getting reminded about camel case as well.
Yeah,
camel case for your hashtags, everyone. And I'm guilty because I mean I just type something, and also what I find happens is that sometimes tech conspires against you. So I'll write something out camel case, and autocorrect will then replace it.
Yes.
And I've noticed actually in iOS 11 that it's getting much more intrusive in what it's replacing, and I was dictating some stuff last night, and it was replacing whole sentences with what it thought was better. not even, you know, you could see it had picked it up on the recognition, and I've been using speech recognition for 20 years. I know how it works. Yeah. But so it wasn't the recognition engine. It was actually something else. It was the autocorrect engine coming in going, I don't think you actually meant to say that. I think you want to say this. No, I don't.
The machines,
So you need to have more trust and sympathy for the young artificial intelligence, you know.
So it was interesting from a speech recognition nerd point of view, watching what was going on, but also really frustrating because I kept redictating stuff, and it kept just putting in what Apple wanted. You know, it's like I'm going to mention it's almost like product placement.
He's getting really good.
No, it was kind of really annoying and freaky.
Yeah, and like you said, that tech's been around for like speech recognition. It's been getting better and better. But then if something like that comes in and interferes with the way
so I don't think this is the recognition engine that's failing. I think that this is an interplay between autocorrupt and the recognition. So there's two technologies sort of fighting it out here. It was really quite interesting, and it's having interesting effects. I think we're pretty much at the end of our half hour. It's flown by. It's been a pleasure as always. And we need to do our usual thank you, Barclays, for keeping the lights on, helping us with captions, etc. And just generally being great supporters of accessibility and AXSchat. So thank you very much, Thomas. We look forward to you joining us on Twitter on Tuesday.
Great.
And it's been great.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks, everybody.